This is WEFT Champaign, 90.1 FM, community radio for East Central Illinois, streaming live at www.weft.org. The views and opinions expressed here are those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent those of WEFT, its Board of Directors, Associates, Station Manager, or Prairie Air Incorporated. The following program is pre-recorded and consists of two parts. The first part was originally aired in 2011, and the second part was recorded on December 6th, 2015. Welcome to Weekend Heartbeat. I'm Sean David, and this is A New Lamp.
New lamp for old. New lamp for old. Remember how Aladdin headed out to get oil for his mother's old dented, tarnished lamp? And in the market he met a magician calling out these words. This strange man was offering to give him a brand new shiny lamp for his old one. That's what I want to offer you, if you'll have it. A new lamp of spiritual guidance. But maybe you already have such a lamp, which still burns brightly. Great! You are still welcome to join us simply to learn who we are. But maybe your lamp of divine guidance has gotten dented and tarnished like Aladdin's. Or perhaps you have no such lamp at all. To you, I offer a new lamp. Hi, my name is Marilyn. Welcome to A New Lamp, a program designed to make you acquainted with the Baha'i religious faith. I hope you will choose to spend the next few minutes with me. Thanks.
From the cold black cavern of misery his diamond light did shine. Exiled cruelly the nature of divinity, golden wings took flight. Baghdad claimed the cradle of eternity from the start of time. He perched upon its portals and its passages, eyes like molten fire. I am the royal falcon on the arm of the Almighty. I unfold the drooping wings of every broken bird and started on its flight. Gazing round at discord and division, he tried to set it right. Bore the brunt of poison and derision, appealing to the sky. Arrows of callousness and jealousy were fired on every side. The time had come to fly off and retire unto the mountain heights. I am the royal falcon on the arm of the Almighty. I unfold the drooping wings of every broken bird and started on its flight. Light, a beacon of light, like an eagle who flies. wandering the hilltops and the valleys, contemplating no return, until a small child far off in the township cried for his father. Tears they soared high up into the heavens across the clouds of night. They reached him where he stood upon the mountain, pain cut like a knife. I am the royal falcon on the arm of the Almighty. I unfold the drooping wings of every broken bird and started on its flight. I am the royal falcon on the arm of the Almighty. I unfold the drooping wings of every broken bird and started on its flight. Light, a beacon of light, light. An eagle he flew to his side.
Well, here we are again with Baha'u'llah still in the Black Pit. Though many expected him to perish there, he did survive, but bore the scars from the chains on his neck for the rest of his life. We may wonder how he came to escape death when so many had perished. He was highly esteemed by people of both high and low degree who would oppose such an act on the government's part. There was an attempt to poison him while he was in the Siakal. When there was no proof of complicity on his part in the attempt on the Shah's life, his persecutors had no choice but to release him, weak and confined to his bed to recuperate. He had 1 month for he and his family to prepare for exile, never to return to the land of his birth again. And so he, his family, and followers journeyed to Baghdad in the dead of winter from January 12th to April 8th, 1853. A house was rented in the old part of town. Among the exiles was his half-brother, who he had raised after their father's death. Yahya was ambitious but cowardly, and was encouraged by an accomplice to make a claim to be the one that the Bab had chosen to be his successor. This caused much disturbance among the Babis. As Baha'u'llah's prestige arose among the city officials, Yahya's jealousy grew. Baha'u'llah chose to leave Baghdad and retired to the mountains of Kurdistan, where he dwelt alone for 2 years until his family finally found him and begged him to return. The plight of the Babis under Yahya's leadership was not good. They were disheartened, poor, and their faith weakened. Upon Baha'u'llah's return, things improved, and Baha'u'llah lived in Baghdad for 7 years. The Sultan, head of the Ottoman Empire in Turkey, requested he be transferred to Constantinople, which is now Istanbul. So many people came to see him prior to his leaving their area that the house could not contain them. So Baha'u'llah rented a rose garden on the other side of the Tigris River and pitched his tent there for 12 days, where everyone could come to bid him farewell. During these 12 days, he made public that he was the one, the promised one, the one whom God would make manifest. April 21st through May 2nd is celebrated by Baha'is as the festival of Rizwan. Rizwan means paradise and is what Baha'u'llah called the garden. Roses were piled high in his tent and the nightingales sang through the night. The day arrived for his departure, 70 souls in all. What the Sultan had expected to be a shameful departure became a triumphant one as he rode away on a red roan, with the guards acting more as a guard of honor. A 12-day journey took them to Constantinople, and after 4 months they were sent even further to Adrianople, where they stayed 4.5 years. Unexpectedly, the Sultan had them moved to Palestine, Baha'u'llah to Akka, and Yahya to Cyprus. This was in 1868. We will study the latter years of his life next week.
Gathered now at the mystic hour in the garden of Bresvan, circling around his blessed tent in the garden of Bresvan, and the nightingales sing, and the souls are on fire, as the crimson-colored ark sets sail in the presence of the best beloved of the world. Garden of Bresvan. The fragrance of the rose is strong in the garden of Bresvan. The friends are silent, struck with awe in the garden of Bresvan, as the Ancient of Days lifts a myriad veils of light, and the new creation sings with joy in the presence of the best beloved of the world. In the garden of Bresvan. Lord of names ascends his throne in the garden of Bresvan. Virtue now and quaff your fill in the garden of Bresvan. Everlasting life from the hands of his grace bestowed upon all humankind in the presence of the best beloved of the world.
My captivity can bring on me no shame. Nay, by my life it conferreth on me glory. That which can make me ashamed is the conduct of such of my followers as profess to love me, yet, in fact, follow the evil one. They, indeed, are of the lost. Baha'u'llah. Thanks so much for being with me this morning. I hope you have found a blessing during these few minutes. If you want to learn more about the Baha'i religion, you can go online to www.bahai.us. To contact me, my email address is anewlamp@yahoo.com. Thanks, and have a great day.
Baha Jalal Jamal Azamat Nur Rahmat Kalimat Kamal Azmat Izat Mushiatam Kodat Kol Masadav Sharaf Sultan Mukalla Splendor, glory and beauty Grandeur, light and mercy Words, perfections and names Might and will and knowledge Power, speech, questions and honor Sovereignty, dominion and loftiness Sovereignty, dominion and loftiness These are the names of the months.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the December airing of A New Lamp. The music you just heard is called Song of the Month, and the texts and music are by Jack Lenz and Doug Cameron, and it was performed by our guests for today, Keith and Cora Hayes. They are members of the local spiritual assembly of the Baha'is in Urbana. We've been eagerly anticipating the day when you'd be able to be with us. A lot has been going on in your lives this past year to prevent that from happening until now. Allahu Akbar.
Allahu Akbar,
Marilyn.
thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Keith. Hi, Cora.
Hi, Sean.
Hey, Sean.
I do ask your pardon today. I've had laryngitis and just getting over it, so my radio voice is not too great. So please bear with me. Let's see here. Okay, you're both Baha'is, and Cora, you said that you've been a Baha'i for about 15 years. Or 10 years, actually. So you became a Baha'i once you became 15?
I did.
You declared at that time?
Yeah, 15 is the age at which youth can decide for themselves if the Baha'i faith is the truth that speaks to them, and it's their responsibility to educate themselves and to independently investigate the truth. I was lucky to grow up in a family that really encouraged me to do so. My parents had become Baha'is when I was about 8 years old, and I spent quite a while going to Baha'i gatherings and feast, and also singing in the church choir at the same time. And I had many good friends in both faith communities. And,
That's great. So, Keith, I know for you that your history includes friend Sean here.
Never.
With whom you've been friends for quite a long time. Would you like to take it from there?
Certainly, Marilyn. So my story actually begins when I was about 7 years old, and I had a babysitter that gave me a prayer book. She was leaving to go do service at the Baha'i World Center in Haifa.
Really?
And she gave me this children's prayer book as a gift, and I promptly threw it on the floor, proclaiming that I don't want a crummy old book, I want a toy. Well, my mother sat me down. Indeed. My mother sat me down and explained that this was a very important book. This was a special gift she'd given me, and I really should pay attention to it. And so I read through it and really loved what I read there. Just the prayers of Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha. And it felt right to me. And I decided whatever that was, I wanted to be a part of it. I didn't have a name for it for many years. Until we moved to Bloomington, and I was integrated into the community there, and I found out there were other people who read these things and they had a name for it, and it was being Baha'i. And when I was about 15, I started reading the writings for myself instead of just going with what others said, and
Right.
found that a lot of what I believed really was in there. It was kind of spooky because I thought that I was just unique somehow because no one else seemed to agree with me so much. And it was amazing. A couple of years after that, Sean and I started talking at a summer school. And we pretty much have never stopped since. That was 25 plus years ago.
It's a good way of putting it.
Indeed. And one of the things that we do is pretty much any social issue that we run into that has an impact on us, we talk about and we debate. And it always goes back to the Baha'i writings for us.
Yes.
And we really like to just dig into them and unpack them and see how they hold up for us. And it always does. And because of that, it's given us an opportunity to really get to know the writings, and it's been a very enjoyable, I would say, partnership.
So, okay, let's see. How about let's take a little break right now to hear another song? How about that?
Sounds great. This song is called Greater is God, and it's a tune that Keith wrote for some children that he was teaching in a children's class.
Greater is God than every great one, Yahweh. Greater is God than every great one, Yahweh. There are times when I feel like the world is too big. It's all so confusing and I'm just a kid. I pray, oh God, guide me, I don't know what to do. And suddenly the world's just my size. Greater is God than every great one, Yahweh. Greater is God than every great one, Yahweh. A while back I was really afraid. I crawled under a blanket and I hid there for days. I pray God protect me cause I'm really scared. And suddenly things were okay. Greater is God than every great one, Yahweh. Greater is God than every great one, Yahweh. The other day I was sitting at home, feeling all sad because I was alone. I asked, are you there, God? I could use a friend, and now I'm not lonely no more. Greater is God than every great one, Yahweh. Greater is God than every great one, Yahweh.
This is really our lucky day. So I know both of you consider working and developing family and youth a very important part of your Baha'i experience. How about you two take it from here?
Certainly, Marilyn.
Thank you, Marilyn.
So Cora and I have had the pleasure and opportunity to work with many youth and those approaching youth. Typically, you'd think of them as adolescents, those who are about 12 and older.
So the work that we've done with youth is often helping them understand their role in society. And Keith, you can explain this better than I can. The role of youth is mirrored by the current conditions in society.
Yes, and it's one of the things that the Baha'i writings tell us is many of the things around us in the world today are a distortion of the spiritual character of society.
Oh, very much.
And that we have progressed as a society, starting with the family, and moved forward to the tribe, the city-state, the nation, and now the world. And one of the things Baha'u'llah, the founder of the faith, has come to tell us is that we're approaching the maturity of humanity. And that necessitates no less than a complete change in the institutions of society.
Right.
Not necessarily because they're broken in some way. It could be easy to treat it pejoratively, and I don't think that's the intent. There are things that are very negative around us, but many of those things are arising because the institutions don't fit us anymore, and we need to develop something new and move forward. And part of that is because if you think about it, as recently as the 50s, we in the United States considered ourselves in a society that was very monolithic in many ways. Most people around us were the same. We were a Christian nation. We were white, middle class, and we saw Ozzie and Harriet on the TV, and we felt good about this. Following Vietnam and our greater introduction to the rest of the world, we can't really say that anymore. We now have a lot of differences in our society.
Yes.
And without something that helps us embrace those differences and helps us to really approach it in a mature way rather than in a reactive way, problems will arise. And so this is a very important thing when we talk about youth. When you look at adolescence as a definition, that was defined in a very negative way. It was a problematic time, a time of raging hormones and storm and stress. And
Freud even considered it a stage of mental illness.
yes, he did.
There are moments, yes.
We haven't gotten to that point yet with Wesley. It's still in the 8 months.
Right.
So interestingly, that definition was founded in many ways on a defunct philosophy of the late 1800s called recapitulation theory. And that theory was one that stated that as an organism grows, it goes through all its previous evolutionary stages. And that when we get to humans, now we're going through our social stages. And so adolescence was a time of returning to the tribal point of humanity's past, where tribes fight against one another. It's kind of iconoclastic, and that you can't help with this. We have to protect ourselves from youth and protect them from themselves because it's merely our genetic development. You can't change it. And so what entered into our public conception of youth is a very negative idea.
Even the term teenager was coined as a marketing tool. It didn't have any inherent meaning beyond a new population to which to sell products.
So it's interesting that we have such a negative view of youth. We have so many problems with youth finally learning to grow up, be mature, and enter into society. And it's fascinating that that all happened about the same time that Baha'u'llah tells us we're entering into humanity's maturity. And it's time for something new. And that makes sense. We weren't there before, so it's naturally we wouldn't have a good definition of what that means.
True.
So when we work with youth, we try to help them develop a much different understanding. And that's one of the things that the writings give us, is a very different idea of what youth means.
Abdu'l-Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, tells us that the suckling babe passeth through various physical stages, growing and developing at every stage until its body reaches the age of maturity. Having arrived at this stage, it acquireth the capacity to manifest spiritual and intellectual perfections. The lights of comprehension, intelligence, and knowledge become perceptible in it, and the powers of its soul unfold.
So where before the individual child was limited in many ways, physiologically, their understanding. They're things they cannot grasp no matter how much you try to help them do so. When they reach this age of maturity, which in the Baha'i faith that's at 15 years of age, when they reach the age of maturity, suddenly they can grasp all of the things that someone who was older could. And consider this in terms of society as well.
They have the capacity to grasp this,
That's
and aren't necessarily prepared at that moment to just step into that role. But that's one of the
Right.
things that we as Baha'is have, as Baha'i parents, have a duty to do for our children, is to prepare them to step into that role at age 15 and make a graceful transition across the threshold of maturity. And the Baha'i writings are actually very eloquent as they talk about the qualities of youth and the capacity that youth have to transform society, to bring about the kingdom of God on earth. That would be the best way to put it. By their actions, by their choices. Because, as we see today, youth have a very big impact on the life of society. The interests of youth are what guides social media,
in marketing.
and marketing. Yeah,
It's a youth-dominated culture right now. I mean, there's a youth obsession right now.
yeah.
Very much so.
And that's a very important point, is that as those who are older, and I'm avoiding the term adult because within the framework of development of the Baha'i faith, the term adult doesn't really fit. And that's all right, because we don't have an academic definition for adult. We've taken it for granted. It's something that we describe by various traits, but we don't really know what it is. And without understanding what it really is and looking at how important youth are, it's natural then that we would look back and want to try to hold on to youthhood as long as possible. You know, there have been several books. One good one is The Teenaging of American Culture.
But one of the things that sets youth apart in the context of the Baha'i writings is that youth are looked to, this is anyone over the age of 15, are looked to, because of the qualities they possess, as an example for everybody older than 15. And so, for instance, Abdu'l-Baha describes youth and says, they must be distinguished amidst men by their sanctity and detachment, their loftiness of purpose, magnanimity, determination, noble-mindedness, tenacity, and by the elevation of their aims and spiritual qualities. This is much different than what we hear in secular society.
Yes, it's almost in opposition of what we hear. You know, we see youth in our secular society as being in between. We still can't let them go because they don't know everything they need to know in the world. And it's a very scary thing because at some point you're supposed to kind of magically know all the things you know.
Right.
And it doesn't really work that way.
I don't feel like adulting today.
Yeah, I don't want to adult today either.
Right.
Yeah. And it's important to make the point, though, that, as Cora said earlier, just because someone has reached the age of 15, the age of maturity, it doesn't mean they're suddenly mature. Abdu'l-Baha tells us how many a young person are mature and sound of judgment, how many an older person is ignorant and confused. Mm-hmm. For maturity hath ever depended upon reason and intellect, not on a number of days.
Mm-hmm. Right. And also he talks at some point about the fact that from the time they are infants at their mother's breasts, they should also be being taught about God, about the faith. And so this is something that we shouldn't put off until we think they're old enough to start learning. They learn these things very young. I know in my life, I remember the first question I ever asked my mother, where is God? Where did God come from? These things have to start out very early and not wait. As he says, by the time you reach that age of maturity, the age of 12 even, it's too late. Anything that's going to be gained after that, well, maybe, but not nearly as permanent, not as strong. So
this is a very, very important point. You know, one of the things that's happened with the institution of childhood over the 20th century is it was further and further oriented away from learning about the adult world. Mm-hmm. And childhood is really a time of apprenticeship and learning how to be a functional member of society. But we've turned it towards fantasy. You know, toys became a major market in the 20s, following the child labor laws, which were a very good thing. But what it did is it suddenly turned children from being some a type of contributor to the family to being consumers. And we went from consumers to there being an investment, because children eventually were going to help take care of the family and were to be successful somehow. And so some of the problems that we've seen with teenagers, with youth, have been because of that shift from being producers in the family to being consumers to being an investment. And rather than giving them a role that is commensurate with their abilities and helping their latent abilities come to the fore, instead, we've placed many, many constrictions upon their behavior, and really we give them the wrong sorts of freedom. We give them freedom to avoid roles of responsibility.
Yes.
The freedom to opt out of things that are meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Even the simple family chores, unfortunately, seem to have fallen by the wayside, you know. Doing the dishes, sweeping the floor, whatever.
Well, Wesley's doing a good job of finding all the dust bunnies in the corners for us now.
Oh, good. He's off to a good start.
You wish you'd eat less of them.
I really do wish you'd eat less, yes.
Isn't it fun?
It's an adventure.
Hey, is it time for another song?
Oh, we'd love to.
Definitely.
Great.
This song is The First Hidden Word by Baha'u'llah, and the tune for it was actually written by a group of youth at a youth retreat, 4 years ago?
Something like that.
And they collaborated to develop the tune and rhythm together and then performed it.
Great.
O Son of Spirit, my first counsel is this: possess a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, that thine may be a sovereignty, ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. O Son of Spirit, my first counsel is this: possess a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, that thine may be a sovereignty, ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. O Son of Spirit, my first counsel is this: possess a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, that thine may be sovereignty, ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. Ancient, imperishable, and everlasting.
I have noticed over the years that along about 12 years old, and I guess I'm thinking mostly about boys, they suddenly have a wider view besides this little boy view of the world. And you know, it's if at that point they can be well guided, because it's kind of like a point where they're ready for something.
Yes, one of the things that the Baha'i writings tell us is that it is the ages of 12 to 15 that are the in-between age. They have 1 foot in the world of the child and 1 foot in the world of the adult.
Yes.
Or the youth.
Or the youth, yes, in this case, or the youth. And one of the things that developmental theory tells us is that when you start going through puberty at around 10 years of age through 12, the brain changes enough to the point where a child suddenly has the ability to think abstractly. And they can start taking other people's perspectives in a way that is stepping outside of themselves completely. And many of them become very idealistic.
Yes.
Or very cynical. And there's rarely an in-between for young people this age, between 12 and 15. It's one or the other. They're looking for something to connect to that grows them beyond themselves and helps them find an identity. They're thinking, what are my roles in the world? What can I do? What shouldn't I do? And how do I live my life?
And they also start to consider a lot more how their actions affect the lives of others and their choices to do only little boy things or to actually expand their body of knowledge to include other tasks and crafts and the whole gambit of human possibility really becomes open to them at that point in a way that it never was as a child.
You mean they don't have to just keep continuing playing video games?
Oh, that does continue. My husband and I very much enjoy the occasional Mario Kart tournament, I have to admit.
That's all right. There's a child in all of us. I've long since been convinced of that.
Definitely.
Yeah, and this is why it's so important to be preparing our children to learn about the world. To not simply hide them from it, but instead as caregivers, as educators, as parents, to give them a handle on what they need to understand. And there are things to protect them from, definitely. But the thing is that you can't control the information that's coming to your child these days. You really can't unless you keep your child away from the world completely.
Right.
Instead, what seems to be more functional is letting them know your opinion on it. You know, it turns out there was a very good study that was done about 8 years ago now that showed that the influence of parents is the strongest predictor of what's known as social initiative. Social initiative is I make a choice and take action to do something outside of myself. And that holds all the way through 18, 20 years of age. And it's predictive.
And that's even if it appears that the child doesn't listen at the time when the parent voices their opinion, they're still listening. It still has an impact.
It's interesting, isn't it? Of course, coming from Well, Judeo-Christian background, I still very much believe in the proverb, train up a child in the way he shall go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. He might wander kind of in between that young and old, but still you've got that basic in there that's going to stay with them.
Yeah, Abdu'l-Baha says something similar to this, a little bit different. He says that the child is as a tender sapling and will grow up whichever way you train him.
Right.
He also says that a child to not be censored or vilified because it is undeveloped. Rather, it should be patiently trained.
And it does take patience.
Yes, Lordy. One of the things that does help with that, the training process, at least for me, it helps me to know what I'm aiming for at that threshold of maturity at age 15. My child should be ready to take on this role of youth. One of the other ways that youth are described, the Universal House of Justice, which is now our governing body for the Baha'is of the world, as laid out by Baha'u'llah, it stated that the endurance of youth under arduous conditions, their vitality and vigor, and their ability to adapt themselves to local situations, to meet new challenges, and to impart their warmth and enthusiasm to those they visit, combined with the standard of conduct upheld by Baha'i youth, make them the potent instruments for the execution of contemplated projects. So the youth are the ones that are looked to be the leaders in the activities of the community, in the transformation of society. And I know that in raising our child, we want to have this goal in mind for someone who at age 15 can say, I have this idealistic idea, I understand what the Baha'i writings say and how society works, how history influences what I'm looking at today, and I can have an impact on it.
Yes.
And then to carry out that plan and to enlist others in that transformation process as well. That would be the goal.
Right. Keith mentioned earlier about the cynical attitudes, and that type of attitude, unfortunately, takes away this idealistic thing of pipe dreams and how you can make that. But there used to be an old song, you got to have a dream. If you don't have a dream, how are you going to make a dream come true? And I think young people need that, particularly. We do live in a very cynical world, and it's a difficult world. So the idea of not only having ideals, holding ideals, in spite of whatever is going on in the world.
As Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world.
Yes, yes.
One important point I'd like to make is one of the things that the Baha'i writings are very clear on is that there is never a point where we should, as children, stop looking to our parents and other family members for input. There's one of the ideals that seems to exist in parenting today and in society is the idea of raising a fully independent person. They're self-contained. They know everything they need to know, and we hope they have that by what used to be 16, actually, in the 50s and 60s, moved to 18 in the 70s. Now it's 22, 23, and these days it's 27 or so.
Yes.
And when a person is we think they know enough that they need to know, and one could say that's because of the complexity of society, but we'll leave that issue aside for now. But one important point is that you should always turn to your family and consult on matters of import. Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the faith, reminds us that, or cautions us that children in the West tend to be a little too independent from their parents. And if we pull back a little bit and we know that development continues, it never stops. One of the things we know about is, with neural development, well, we know teenagers, their brains aren't finished. Well, the reality is nobody's brain's really finished. That idea came into the fact that we thought the adult brain stopped at some point. It doesn't. It continues to change. And many of the things that they say aren't ready till a person's in their 20s, the frontal cortex and the areas that control decision-making, really continue to change until one's 40s. And so there's something else going on. there. But the Baha'i writings tell us that we continue to progress for eternity till we've reached our created level of perfection.
We continue to mature
We
for
turn
eternity.
to eternity, right. And so there's never a point where you have to be concerned that you know everything. There's never a point where parents have to be concerned that their child knows everything. And so everyone can just relax a little bit.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned about that he said that our Western children tend to be too independent. And I understand why he's saying that. And yet, by the same token, today, the children in their 20s are all returning home. The parents can now carry insurance on them up to, what is it, age 26 or something?
I think it is, yeah.
And so that's kind of a...
Well, consider that we have somewhat conflated the idea of maturity and being adult with financial independence.
That's true.
And those things don't really connect. You know, there's a very popular theory called emerging adulthood. And the things that were salient to these emerging adults was finishing one's education, financial independence, and taking responsibility for one's actions, one's decisions. Finishing one's education is going to depend a little bit on circumstance.
Right.
If you had a large family that you had to take care of growing up, it might take a while for you to be stable to the point where you can go to college. If you weren't sure what you wanted to do, it might take a while. Also, the average person changes careers 3 times now. So when is one's education finished? The financial independence is based entirely on market forces. You know, if there aren't enough jobs, if the economy is down,
Right.
then you can't get work. You know, look at what was happening in Egypt. They had an unemployment rate of well over 25%.
Oh, really?
Does that make these young people immature? I don't think so. It's not connected.
Right.
Yeah, so if we consider maturity instead from a more spiritual standpoint and look for those powers of the soul and the intelligence and knowledge markers for maturity instead, it makes a lot more sense to me anyway.
You know, something else I have read just recently by Abdul Baha, when he says that we should not, I don't have the words quite right, but essentially don't make life easy for your children. They need to have the difficulty to mature. And that's something we tend to see in our society of trying to protect them to the point of not having to face difficulties, which of course leaves them vulnerable as they get older.
Well, yeah, that's natural. He says, accustom your children to hardship.
Yes.
As if I have the quote right. But if you think about it, if we consider our children as an investment, where we're trying to maximize their potential, maximize their financial success, maximize their ability to obtain happiness in some way, then letting them go through the negative experience of a bad consequence becomes too much. You can't do that. You're not maximizing their potential that way. But what if instead we think about maximizing their ability to be leaders, maximizing their ability to be resilient in a stressful, chaotic environment,
Right.
maximizing their ability to understand others and achieve a healthy interdependence. You know, our world in many ways has reached the end of its ability to be competitive without bounds. You know, Baha'u'llah tells us now that we need to learn to work as a global society and to integrate that way. We need to be interdependent because no person, no nation can be self-contained. We must be able to ask for help when we need it. We must be able to offer help when it's needed.
Yes.
And to be able to share resources in a wise manner. And that starts when a child is very young, where they're learning how to share, where they're learning that if they knock something over and make a mess, then clean it up, where they're learning that they're not always going to get their way, and that's all right.
Right.
I've worked with young people who have gotten into high school and they did not do well on a key exam. And they have no context for not succeeding at something. You know, I've read articles of professors who have saying we don't know what to do because these college students come to us and they've never failed before.
Yes.
The failure is a hardship.
Sure.
And if you're not exposing your children to things where they might not succeed, then you're not giving them a context for an environment that may or may not go their way.
Right. A child has to learn we don't always win.
Yeah. I'm very grateful that I was raised that way.
Well, Keith and Cora, as you know, this program is part of the Heartbeat Collective, which is a WAFT effort to call attention to activity in the community that supports the nonprofit sector. We've been talking so far about the theory and philosophy of fostering youth and junior youth, but I was wondering if you could tell us about the efforts that you've been making to bring these ideas into action in the Champaign-Urbana area. Keith?
Well, we can talk about that, certainly. It's we're not doing much right now because we have an 8-month-old.
Yeah.
And that kind of takes away. But in the past, Cora and I have been involved in what's known as the Junior Youth Empowerment Program, which is a global program for junior youth between the ages of 12 and 15. And this program is designed to introduce these young people to the idea of leadership. It's designed to teach them to consider a service-oriented lifestyle, one where they look around and see what would be a service to my community that is of value and would make a difference. And did you have something to add, Cora?
Yeah. Also, it helps them start out with that sense of interdependence because it develops a group of peers who are used to doing things like having meaningful conversations about subjects of deep import, both spiritual and just social situations. How do you handle this kind of interaction tactfully or mindfully? And it's a group of people that you get to know and become your friends throughout your life. A junior youth group is a touchstone for many young people who are making this transition through the age of maturity and on to the rest of their lives. I've very much enjoyed working with groups of youth and junior youth who are engaging in a junior youth group and doing service in the community. They're finding what the needs of their neighbors are. They're finding out what the true needs of their families are and catering to that through these junior youth groups.
And this has been really quite successful. It started as a social and economic development project in Central America, and it has spread from there.
It's global now.
Yeah. There is a community in Colombia where 80% of the young people in the community are part of the junior youth program. There's a community in India where it's a similar story, and the mayor himself tries to get parents to enroll their children in this program. One of the elements of it is a literacy and basic logic, teaching how to think critically. One of the problems that we have today is marketing. Marketing is a huge industry that's designed to manipulate people to buy into a brand and think the way the brand is. If you teach young people to think critically and to also be interdependent and to ask for information, they're inoculated against this. If they have a purpose, then a lot of the things that we see that are behaviors that arise from being bored or from being feelings too cynical about the world and angry go away. There are learning sites happening, Chicago,
Toronto.
Yeah. And I don't think the Portland area is a learning site yet, but I think it will be one at some point soon, where it's making a huge impact on the community there. It's changing the entire character of how people see youth and how they interact with those who are older and younger.
And this kind of group, Keith and I would love to be able to start another junior youth group in this community. Right now, with an 8-month-old, we're not doing a whole lot, but in the near future, if you have interest in this or you have a junior youth in your family, it's between the ages of 12 and 15, who might be interested in such a group, you can contact the Baha'i community here through our website at cu-bahai.org and click contact.
Yeah, and another very important point is the junior youth program is not about teaching the Baha'i faith. It is in that perspective, but it includes very inspiring things from many other traditions as well. Its point is to help teach service and help young people develop a service ethic and the ability to think critically and morally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Keith and Cora, this has been everything we hoped it would be. You are dear to us both, right?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marilyn and Sean. It's been a pleasure.
I put up with them.
Let's see here. We'll take a look at what's going on at the Baha'i Center in Urbana over these next few weeks.
On Tuesday evenings at 7 o'clock, there is a prayer and meditation meeting led by Joan Mills. Each Sunday morning at 10:30, there is a regular devotional program that includes Baha'i and other religious scriptural prayers and readings, and oftentimes music. On the fourth Sunday of each month, the devotional program at 10:30 will be followed by a potluck lunch at noon and game day, an afternoon for family-friendly fun and games for all ages. The Baha'i Center is located at 807 East Green Street in Urbana, a couple blocks east of Lincoln Square. It is located on the red bus line, and it is wheelchair accessible.
Anything else, anybody?
No, it sounds good.
We want to wish a blessed Christmas to all our Christian friends.
A happy Hanukkah as well, since it happens to be happening
Hanukkah
today.
is happening this
today.
week.
Oh, this week.
And a Happy New Year to all. At this point in our program, we usually have some Baha'i readings. However, today, because we have enjoyed this beautiful music and conversation, how about if you folks sing us a prayer?
It'd be our pleasure. Thank you.
Say God sufficeth for all things above all things, and nothing in the heavens or the earth, but God sufficeth. Verily he is in himself the knower, sustainer, the omnipotent. Say God sufficeth for all things above all things, and nothing in the heavens or the earth, but God sufficeth. Verily he is in himself the knower, sustainer, the omnipotent. Say God sufficeth for all things above all things, and nothing in the heavens or the earth, but God sufficeth. Verily he is in himself the knower, sustainer, the omnipotent. Say God sufficeth for all things above all things, and nothing in the heavens or the earth, but God sufficeth. Verily he is in himself the knower, sustainer, the omnipotent.
If you would like to learn more about the Baha'i community in the Champaign-Urbana area, or any of the activities we have mentioned today, you can visit our website at www.cu-bahai.org. If you would like to learn more about the Baha'i Faith, you may go to www.bahai.us. If you would like to contact the local Baha'i community in Champaign-Urbana, please visit our website at www.cu-bahai.org and click Contact. Thank you again for joining us today. I hope you'll join us again next month. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this week's Weekend Heartbeat on WEFT Champaign 90.1 FM, Community Radio, Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, streaming live at www.weft.org.